You didn't lose your voice. You gave it away one silent compromise at a time. They told you staying quiet was maturity. But deep down, your silence was never peace. It was tension dressed as virtue. Nietzsche never feared silence. He feared what it hides. So here's the question. What if your calm face was actually your most violent scream? And what if your silence wasn't weakness, but a quiet rebellion? Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't need to speak. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it burns. A silence that stretches not from peace, but from a deep and invisible exhaustion. You know this silence, the one that settles after you've swallowed your truth for the 10th time in 1 week. The silence that creeps in when you nod to avoid conflict, when you smile through disrespect, when you say it's fine, and feel something in you disappear. They called it emotional intelligence. But no one warned you that intelligence, when misused, turns into self-erasure. You weren't being wise. You were vanishing. Nietzsche didn't see silence as absence. He saw it as a presence so powerful it disorients. To him, silence wasn't empty. It was a confrontation, a refusal to play a rigged game, a stance, not a surrender. But we weren't taught that. We were trained to maintain harmony at any cost. Taught that good people don't escalate. Taught that choosing peace means staying quiet, even when your soul is screaming. Here's the truth. You didn't lose your battles because you lacked arguments. You lost them the moment you believed your silence made you safe. Didn't. It made you predictable. It made you easy to overlook, to interrupt, to dominate. Because silence without self-possession is not strategy. It's submission. And yet, the opposite is also true. When silence is chosen, not from fear, but from sovereignty, it becomes magnetic, disruptive, even lethal. Nietzsche once wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." When you stop reacting, explaining, justifying, you stop shrinking. You stop needing permission to exist. So this video isn't about making you louder. It's about making your silence mean something. It's about showing you that when you choose to withhold your energy, when you withdraw your emotional availability, you're not retreating, you're reclaiming. You've been conditioned to think that not speaking up is weakness. But what if your silence could become the loudest presence in the room? We're going to dismantle the old myth that the one who speaks last wins. That control is exerted through dominance. That to be powerful is to be heard. Nietzsche knew otherwise. Power, he believed, was quiet, focused, intentional, and sometimes completely silent. So if you're tired of being the one who understands but is never understood, if your calm has become a prison instead of a choice, this is your turning point. By the end of this video, you'll see silence not as a void, but as a weapon. Not as absence, but as the most potent form of presence. This isn't about pretending not to care. It's about caring so deeply for your energy that you choose when, how, and if you respond at all. You've always been the one who understands. The one who sees the pain behind someone's anger, the fear behind their silence. You've built bridges in conversations where others only built walls. But no one taught you how to stop being the bridge and become the land. You were taught empathy, but not boundaries. You were praised for being calm, but not for being clear. And slowly, without realizing, your gift turned into your trap. Because the world doesn't reward those who understand, it exploits them. Nietzsche called this herd morality, the value system imposed by the collective to protect the fragile, to punish strength disguised as solitude. He warned that virtues like kindness and patience, when stripped of agency, become weapons of self-destruction. You think you're being wise when you let things slide. But silence offered out of fear of rejection isn't peace. It's internal erosion. Each time you bite your tongue to keep the room calm, you teach others that your voice is optional. Each time you avoid conflict to maintain connection, you dissolve your own shape a little more. And what's worse, you begin to think this is who you are. But ask yourself, when was the last time someone really tried to understand you? When was the last time your silence was met with curiosity, not convenience? Being the one who understands all the time is a lonely kind of role, a backstage existence in a life you were meant to star in. You don't want dominance. You want reciprocity. But empathy without self-awareness becomes a prison. You become fluent in the language of others, but forget your own. Nietzsche's lens wasn't one of cold detachment. It was brutal clarity. He saw that too much understanding can make you invisible. Because if you're always bending to avoid being too much, you start to disappear into the shape others need you to be. You don't speak. You accommodate. You don't disrupt. You dissolve. But the cost is steep. You walk away from conversations feeling drained, not because you gave too little, but because you gave everything without being received. So let this be your reckoning. Understanding is not the same as being understood. Compassion is not the same as connection. And silence is not the same as surrender. The next time you feel the familiar pull to explain, to mediate, to absorb someone else's storm, pause and ask, is this understanding or is this abandonment of self? Because true strength isn't in holding the space for others. It's in refusing to evacuate your own. Not all exhaustion comes from work. Some of it comes from conversations that feel like invisible wars. You walk away with no bruises, but you're bleeding internally. There are no raised voices, no insults, yet you feel as if your soul just ran a marathon. That's because emotional labor has a cost. And no one is charging more than those who require you to constantly manage their emotions while ignoring your own. You've been taught that it's polite to explain yourself, that it's mature to always clarify. But clarity without reciprocity becomes depletion. Nietzsche understood this imbalance deeply. He wrote that the one who needs to convince has already lost the argument. Why? Because the very act of over-explaining comes from a place of insecurity, the fear of not being seen, not being believed, not being enough. Every time you start justifying your boundaries, every time you offer more context so someone doesn't take it the wrong way, every time you repeat yourself to be understood, you lose energy. You're not conversing, you're defending. You're not connecting, you're negotiating your right to exist as you are. And this is where the fatigue comes from. When you speak not to express, but to manage perception. You step into a role you were never meant to play, the emotional manager of other people's fragility. This constant explaining becomes a performance. A mask you wear to avoid being seen as rude, cold, or too much. But behind that mask, there's a scream. A scream that has been silenced so many times it now only echoes inside your chest. A scream that says, why can't I just say what I mean and be heard the first time? Nietzsche believed that the strongest individual isn't the one who speaks the most. It's the one who chooses their words like arrows. Minimal, precise, unapologetic. So what if your exhaustion isn't from being too emotional, but from being too edited? What if the weight you feel isn't from life itself, but from carrying the burden of constantly translating yourself for others? Ask yourself, why do I feel the need to soften the truth? Why do I fear being misunderstood more than I fear betraying myself? Why do I keep talking, even when no one is really listening? It's time to stop bleeding energy into conversations that don't honor your clarity. To stop over-explaining your boundaries like they're mistakes you have to apologize for. Because every unnecessary justification is a withdrawal from your emotional bank. And sooner or later, you go bankrupt. From now on, let your silence be your clarity. Let your boundaries be declared, not debated. And if someone doesn't understand you, let them. You don't owe your exhaustion to anyone's comfort. You learn to swallow your scream, because they told you that firmness was aggression, that reacting meant losing control, that silence was maturity. But what they never said is that sometimes silence is just another word for vanishing. They praised you for your composure, but no one asked how much of yourself you buried to maintain it. You became the calm one, the strong one, the one who doesn't let things get to them. And slowly that became your cage. Nietzsche called this the morality of slaves, a system of values imposed not to empower you, but to keep you manageable. Teaches that to endure is noble, that to suppress is virtuous. But what if your endurance is the very thing keeping you invisible? What you call balance might be resignation. What you call peace might be fear in disguise. There's a kind of silence that isn't stillness, it's suffocation. And here's the paradox. The world celebrates those who don't react, but only because it benefits from your passivity. People are more comfortable with your silence than with your truth. But comfort is not the same as respect. If your silence is born from fear of conflict, of rejection, of being seen, then it's not a sign of wisdom. It's a quiet betrayal of yourself. And the cost is subtle but brutal. You begin to question your instincts. You doubt your anger. You reframe your wounds as overreactions. You start to gaslight yourself. You become so good at not making others uncomfortable that you forget what comfort even feels like inside your own body. This is the tragedy Nietzsche saw, that the virtues we are taught to uphold, patience, tolerance, silence, can become tools of our own suppression. Because when silence is used to avoid the discomfort of truth, it becomes a prison dressed as discipline. So ask yourself, is your silence strategic or is it survival? Is it a choice or is it conditioning? There is nothing noble about disappearing in the name of harmony. There is nothing wise about withholding truth to protect egos that would never do the same for you. Let go of the illusion that silence always equals strength. Real strength is not in swallowing your truth, it's in knowing when silence speaks louder than defense and when silence is just fear wearing a mask. And remember, silence that comes from fear will always hollow you out, but silence that comes from power fills the room. From today on, if you're going to be silent, let it be the kind of silence that vibrates with truth. Let it be the kind that affirms your presence, not erases it. Because your peace should never cost your identity. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you stop explaining yourself. A kind of power that enters the room when you let them misunderstand you. And don't flinch. Most people are trapped in the need to be understood. They bend, contort, over-articulate, all in hopes of being seen clearly. But clarity isn't always connection. And being understood isn't always respect. Nietzsche understood this trap intimately. He warned that the desire to be understood is often a disguised plea for validation. And validation, while seductive, is a currency of the ego. You want them to get it. You want your silence to be seen as depth, not distance. You want your withdrawal to be read as sovereignty, not disinterest. But here's the truth. If your peace depends on their perception, it's not peace, it's performance. The Übermensch, Nietzsche's ideal of the transcendent human, doesn't seek understanding. He doesn't need agreement. He doesn't explain himself to be accepted. His silence is not a pause. It's a verdict. When you release the compulsion to correct how others see you, you reclaim your energy. You stop being a mirror and start becoming a force. And this is unsettling for those who are used to deciphering you. When they can no longer read you, they lose control. Because what they can't define, they can't diminish. There is profound strength in ambiguity. When your silence is chosen, not from fear but from inner clarity, it becomes magnetic. It disorients. It forces the other person to confront the void, the uncomfortable space where they can no longer project their assumptions onto you. And in that space, your presence expands. People think silence is passive, but they're wrong. Strategic silence is dominance without aggression. It's presence without performance. It's truth that refuses to argue. When you choose not to explain, you're not withholding. You're conserving. You're choosing sovereignty over validation. Let them misread you. Let them fill in the blanks with their own stories. Because their interpretation of your silence says more about them than it ever will about you. You're not here to be deciphered. You're here to exist, fully, unapologetically, even if that means being a mystery. So next time you're tempted to clarify your intentions, to prove your innocence, to correct the misunderstanding, pause. Ask yourself, am I speaking from power or from the need to be seen in a certain way? The Übermensch doesn't react, he selects. He chooses his words like a sculptor chooses his chisel. Sparingly, precisely, when it truly matters. And sometimes the most sovereign thing you can do is this. Say nothing. Watch everything. Let them wonder. Silence can be a weapon, but in the wrong hands, it becomes a coffin. You've spent so long mastering how not to speak that you may have forgotten what silence is supposed to mean. It's not hiding. It's not shrinking. It's not ghosting your own soul to keep others comfortable. Real silence isn't a disappearance. It's a declaration. Nietzsche believed that language was often used to conceal, not reveal. That the one who says less but sees more holds the true power. But he also warned, silence without intent is self-erasure. So the question isn't, should I stay silent? It's, who am I when I do? Because if your silence is just a habit, a reflex born from trauma or shame or fear, then it's not power, it's paralysis. To turn silence into strategy, you must reclaim authorship over its meaning. When silence is chosen, not inherited, when it's deliberate, not desperate, It becomes a form of speech only the emotionally fluent can understand. The right pause can shift the temperature of a room. The right withheld word can expose what no argument could. The right moment of stillness can unravel manipulation faster than any confrontation. But here's the paradox: to master silence, you must also master yourself. Because strategic silence isn't the absence of voice, it's the presence of will. It's knowing when to hold back, not because you're afraid, but because you're precise. You don't react. You respond. You observe. You choose. This is emotional authority. And it changes everything. Because the manipulator needs your reaction. The insecure need your reassurance. The dominant need your submission. But when you respond with silence, not out of retreat, but out of sovereign choice, the dynamic fractures. Your silence becomes a wall. They start filling the void with their own projections. They over-explain. They unravel. They reveal themselves. And you? You hold your center. This is not about emotional coldness. It's about sacred self-containment. About knowing that sometimes the most radical act is to simply not engage. So how do you use silence without losing yourself inside it? First, intent. Every silence must be born from clarity. Ask yourself, what am I protecting? What am I refusing to perform? Second, presence. Your body language, your gaze, your stillness all communicate. Don't vanish. Occupy space even in silence. Third, timing. Not all silences are equal. A pause in the right moment is more devastating than any outburst. And finally, closure. Silence is not avoidance. Eventually, you must choose when to speak, not for them, but for you. Let your words be few but sharp. Let your presence speak before your mouth does. And when you choose to remain silent, let it roar. Because real silence is never empty. It's charged. It's chosen. And it changes everything. Silence is not absence. It's the shape of your presence. You've been told to speak up, defend yourself, explain, as if the only language of strength is volume. But some forms of power don't shout. They simply remain. The world listens more to those who speak less. But it feels most shaken by those who don't speak at all. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer need to prove anything. Nietzsche didn't write for the well-behaved. He wrote for those ready to burn their masks, for those who have outgrown the need for applause. He understood what most never dare to say, that true power lies not in domination, but in self-mastery, and that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who isn't trying to be understood. They're too busy being free. Look at your silence now, not as a wound, but as a tool. Not as a symptom of fear, but as a sign of evolution. From this moment on, your silence doesn't have to mean absence. It can mean alignment, precision, dignity, because silence isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about knowing which battles are beneath you. You don't need to correct every misperception. You don't need to chase after being seen. You don't need to translate your soul into a language someone else refuses to learn. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to remain silent and let the world adjust to your frequency. You are not cold. You are focused. You are not distant. You are done leaking energy where it's not valued. So now I ask you to choose. Will your silence be the space where you disappear, or the ground where you finally rise? Will it be your shield of submission, or your crown of sovereignty? Because silence is inevitable. But what you fill it with is up to you. From today forward, let your silence say, I owe nothing. I need no validation. I exist, and that is enough. No more bending for comfort. No more shrinking for peace. No more apologizing for your depth. Nietzsche would tell you, you do not need to win the war. You simply need to stop needing to fight. And when you do, you'll find that the room listens differently. Not to your words, but to your presence. So, if this message reached a part of you that rarely feels seen, write this in the comments. I choose the silence that affirms me, not for likes, not for approval, but as a private vow spoken publicly. And when you're ready, the next video will take you even deeper. Not louder, not brighter, just clearer. Because you weren't made to be understood by everyone. You were made to remember who you are, even in silence.